So it's the end of 2020 nearly, and so I thought I'd do a review of the year. It's raining at the moment, so it's the perfect time for it. And it has been a very weird year, of course, but from a gardening perspective, it's actually been pretty great. So I'm going to stick to the great stuff, and let's start in January. Now, there's not much going on in January. All of our beds are planted to some degree, and we have a pretty good, nice, rich diet. Probably about 60% of what we eat comes fresh from the ground, and the rest comes from the store, a little bit frozen, mostly stored just in our, quote, root cellar, which isn't a cellar. It's just a shed, but it's generally frost-free and it keeps stuff pretty well. Now, what can I mention about January, really? Not a lot, apart from I was walking around the plots and just sort of taking stock of how everything was, and I noticed that I got a lot of empty ground. Now, that empty ground had things planted in it, but it just wasn't planted very intensively. So there was a lot of lettuce beds, for example, with lots of gaps between the lettuces, spinach beds, just the same. If we don't leave gaps, we tend to get a lot of disease, so the gaps are necessary, but what could we plant in the gaps? So this year we've planted a lot more spring onions. In the Brussels sprouts and Colette's bed, basically there were just stems with masses of space around them. And I thought, well, actually, maybe what I can do this in 2021 is I can plant, just broadcast field beans into those beds, and then just cover them up with compost, and then I'll have a really nice carpet of field beans underneath the sprouts and the colettes in spring. I can harvest those all the way through sort of January, February, March and early April, and then at exactly the same time that I take the colettes and the Brussels sprouts out in April ready for the next crop, then I can take the field beans out just at the same time. So a really nice little companion planting there. And I had a few other ideas as well, but basically January was when I really started thinking about how to grow more intensively next year. So what happened in February? Well, in February we decided that we were going to grow much more in the back garden and the front garden, and we put in a new strip of raised beds, and we actually raised up some of the other raised beds a little bit to get more compost in there, because they'd previously been filled just with garden soil, and so there was a lot of weed pressure and they weren't very nutrient dense, those beds. So we put a lot of, another 4 inches of compost on top of them, and this year it's been remarkable. It's doubled the yield from the garden, from the existing beds, and then obviously we've got about 10 square meters of additional beds, and again that's made a massive difference. And it's not just made a difference to the yield, but it's made a really nice difference psychologically just to have so much more growing in the back garden. And then when COVID came, we really appreciated all that extra garden space. It really did make a psychological difference to us to have plenty to do in the back garden, and when we had visitors, for them to be able to enjoy being surrounded by lots of fruit and veg, and when we had kids come round, for them to be able to harvest that fruit and veg. It was just really lovely, and so it's reaffirmed the notion, I suppose, that we had last year that we were going to grow a bit more in the garden, to become a real firm commitment now that we're going to grow as much as possible in the front and back garden, and we're going to grow it in the kind of ornamental kitchen garden style. We're not going to use many flowers, but we are going to grow our veggies in ornamental combinations, and everybody who's come round has just remarked just how beautiful a kitchen garden can look when you do that. And obviously we're biased because it's ours and we really like veggies, fruit and veggies, but yeah, it's been a really lovely experience, and sort of I highly recommend getting rid of your flower borders or supplementing your flower borders with lots of veg. Now, I really start sowing in earnest in February, although I do a reasonable amount in January. And because of COVID in March, what we decided to do was we moved all of our seed starting and seedling rearing to the back garden again. And so I had this rack behind me here in the conservatory. It was full of seedlings, and then a bit later full of small tomato plants and pepper plants, and then a little bit later full of brassicas, etc., etc. And yeah, it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful to be able to water them, whenever they need it, rather than sort of try and drown them in the morning so that they're not frazzled by the time I get back the next morning, as used to happen quite frequently when I had all my seedlings on the allotment. And it's also just been nice to be able to sit in the conservatory and be surrounded by all things growing. And so I got rid of the house plants to give me a bit more space in here, and we moved those to a different room. And yeah, so this room has just become like a little oasis of new life. So yeah, that's something that we've really enjoyed, and that really only happened because of COVID. And so I've got COVID to thank for that, I guess. Yeah, it's been really nice. Now these racks here have got grow lights on them as well, and the advantage of that is that in the dark, dull months I can have these grow lights on and it's just like sitting in the sunshine. So that has been really great, and that's kind of what I think of as March really, is moving the seedlings home. And although January, February and March we have a fantastic, lovely, rich diet, the thing we notice about the fresh harvest during that period of time is they're very green. And so in April it's really lovely when we start to get lots of colour back in the diet, all those colourful radishes and turnips and new season carrots. It's just I don't know about where it appeals to other people, but I just love all that colour arriving in April. And it's a very busy month, of course, April for us. I mean, every month is kind of busy when you're self-sufficient, but April is particularly busy. We've got a huge amount of stuff being cleared from winter and replanted. We've got loads of stuff that was planted in March, sown in March and February, that needs planting out. There's just so much going on, and of course the weeds are coming like thick and fast, but I absolutely love it. It's just so great to be out in the garden again. And April is a lovely sunny month as well for us, so there's loads of time also spent out cycling and hiking. And where we are, we are on the Fylde coast, and there's an amazing cycle track that goes all the way to Fleetwood, which is about, I don't know, maybe 20 miles away, something like that. So there's this coastal path that runs for 20 miles, so you can get off-road 40-miler in, before breakfast sort of thing. It's really lovely. And of course we're surrounded by wonderful hiking country. We've got the Rivington Reservoir system onto one side. Above us we've got the Southern Lakes. A little bit further we've got the Central and Northern Lakes. We've got the Forest of Bowland. We are so lucky here. So in April for me it's really all about the tomatoes and the peppers. So they start to dominate my thinking because I'm surrounded by them all the time. I'm always looking out for green fly on them. I'm nurturing them, potting them on and all that sort of thing. They're all on these grow racks, or they're up in the conservatory on the shelf. And they love it in here, because the thing is with tomatoes and peppers, they really don't want to go below 10 degrees centigrade, about 50 degrees Fahrenheit at night, and obviously not during the day either. And so this conservatory is just perfect for them, because I can keep it at that temperature with supplemental heating at night for about 13p a day or something. I've got a plug that measures how much energy I use on the heater, and so it makes all the difference. And so that's really April is all about this massive amount of planting, this massive amount of bed clearing, and absolutely massive harvests. April, I think, is one of our biggest harvest months, and we don't get more than we get in April until about August. So that we have nothing like the Hungry Gap here. It's such a productive month, and the same with May really, and then we dip a little bit in June, and then we're back up again in July. So the other thing I mentioned that April's a really sunny month, and that's important because it means that that's the time that we take all the cold frame lids off and all the fleece off, and then we replace that with bird netting, because the birds, especially in the garden, just love to come and peck at the soil to get all those worms, and they cover the lettuces with soil and damage the little seedlings and all of that. So yeah, so that's April, is the kind of uncovering of everything that had previously been covered all through winter and early spring. So then in May, that's when all the summer goodies start to arrive for us. So that's when we get our early tomatoes, that's when we get our early strawberries, our early carrots, our early cucumbers, and of course our early beans. And we'll have been without beans from October, so we're really looking forward to those beans arriving. And of course, back end of April, that's when we get our first early potatoes, and then we've got loads of potatoes then in May, and that sort of story just continues then. And then in June, about the early June to middle of June, that's when we get our first baking potatoes, and that's really important because Debbie loves her baking potatoes, but we generally run out of them in about March time, and so she's been without them all that time, and so she's so excited to get them again in the middle of June. And then we get a really big harvest of those in July, and then that sees us through until our main crops. So this year in May, early May, I planted out my peppers and my tomatoes, and really that was quite a mistake, because it was just so frustrating having to keep rushing down to the allotment every night to fleece everything up, and then back in the morning to unfleece it and worry about whether I'd lost plants to the frost. And we had quite a few frosts, and quite bad ones as well in May. I think we had a -4 in the middle of May, and so it's just not the right time to be planting tomatoes and peppers. And I realised that if I just push my sowing dates back a couple of weeks, and therefore push my planting date back a couple of weeks, so that I'm planting towards the end of May, that I actually open up a potential growing window in the polytunnel from February to that time, at middle of May, late May, and in that time I can get a whole extra crop. Now in previous years, basically I've just left the stuff in the polytunnel that I overwintered, and that's spinach and lettuces and a few herbs, and basically that's it. So that's what stayed in the polytunnel, and I harvested that all the way up until the early May, and then got rid of all of that tomatoes and peppers. So this year in February I'm going to start clearing those beds of lettuces and spinach, and I can do that because I've planted a lot in cold frames and low tunnels, and they're coming on stream through February and into early March. And so as I'm clearing the polytunnel, I'm transitioning over to those outdoor beds. But that means I can start calabrese and cauliflowers and early Brussels sprout plants, and turnips and carrots and beetroot and radishes, etc., in the polytunnel. And I've got long enough from the middle of May to the middle of, from the middle of February to the middle of May to get that harvest in. So I had a complete extra harvest window just by pushing that date back a little bit and being a bit more aggressive in my transition time in late winter. So I'm really excited to try that. Never done it before. I've done little elements of it, but I've never done it, as a real systematic activity. And so, yeah, I'm just so excited about trying that out. And by May of next year, I'll know whether it succeeded or not. So late May, in goes my tomatoes, and mainly in the polytunnel this year, I'm doing tomatoes in most of my beds, and in containers I'm doing all sorts of stuff, sweet corn, beans, all sorts of stuff like that, early peas, etc. But all the peppers are going in my little low tunnels outside, and that's because this year that has been so successful. The low tunnels keep the canopy and all the leaves of the peppers and the actual fruits really warm, but the roots are held a little bit cooler. I don't know whether that's the reason that they've done so well, but they have done much better than the ones in the polytunnel, so I'm really excited to do that. And that leaves all the polytunnel space available then for things that grow high, and peppers obviously, well, the ones I grow anyway, don't grow that high. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to trying that out, and that gives me a lot more space for tomatoes. And yeah, so I'm really looking forward to that. And there's lots more experiments I'm doing in the polytunnel, but I won't talk about those because we're talking about last year. I keep talking about next year. So the other big things in May for us are in go all of the winter brassicas, Brussels sprouts and colettes and red cabbages. And for us, those are the three key crops. We eat the leaves of all of those, as well as the actual colettes themselves, and of course the sprouts. But the leaves are a fantastic crop all the way from about the middle of July, and we're still eating those now. And then of course the colettes are fantastic in all through winter, as are the sprouts. So that is probably one of our most important sowings, and we generally do that about the 10th of May. Sorry, not sowings, plantings. We generally do that about the 10th of May. And then we also put in the carrots, and I love planting carrots in early May, but just remember you've got to keep putting the nets on, because it's the absolute worst time to be sowing them from a perspective of carrot fly. So then in June, lots and lots of summer goodies start arriving in abundance. So in May we have a few, in June we have lots, so lots of early tomatoes start arriving. Of course, all the broad beans, all the early green garlic, loads and loads of strawberries. Just what an abundance of summer wonder really starts to arrive in June. Busy month, because that's also when we're harvesting all the broad beans, processing all those and getting those in the freezer. And broad beans are one of the few things we actually do freeze, because they just freeze so well. And of course harvesting all of the garlic and getting all of that processed and dried, etc, etc. And we need to do that by the end of June, because we really want to get our storage beetroot and all of our winter cabbages and cauliflowers and purple sprouting broccoli planted, and they follow on in our succession planning from the garlic and the beans. And then July is also kind of marked by two big things for me. One is that's when we get our first bulk harvest of early baking potatoes, and as I said, that's really important for us. And one of the cats has just arrived in here, so you probably hear her meowing for attention. And that's when I switch over to a fruit salad every day, and that kind of continues all the way through until September. And so in July, that's the time when I've got my raspberries and strawberries and blueberries and blackberries. Wow, what a fruit salad. And then as we enter August, that's when all the peppers that we've been eating one or two of a week start arriving in bulk in August. And that's when also all the tomatoes do. And so that's when Debbie starts up the preserving machine, and she starts making all of the sauces and ketchups and freezing and drying, etc, etc. So just a massive amount of preserving starts to initiate really late July, August, and then September. And of course the harvests are just so colourful, and we generally we do one bulk harvest a week on Sunday, and so we generally have it all laid out on a big dining room table so that we can get it all washed and packed and everything. And it just, it's just so uplifting to see these huge displays of amazing veg all laid out for people. And when you know it's just going to your family, it is so rewarding. For me, that's one of the very best things about gardening, is gifting food to people who really appreciate it. So we're always sowing. I mean, the only month we don't sow is December, and every other month is quite busy from a sowing perspective. But August and September are such important months, and so whilst we're harvesting masses of summer fruits and other summer veggies, we're also really focused on getting all of our sowing done. So loads of spinach, loads of spring onions, loads of lettuces, loads of radishes, loads of turnips, loads of baby brassica greens, all that. Just so much sowing going on through August. And then basically the same again in September, and that's the stuff that's going to go into the polytunnel and into some of the undercover beds. And of course that means I'm really busy again clearing lots and lots of beds. I love it. To October, that's really marked by the fact it's the end of tomatoes and peppers for us, and so over about a 3-week period we gradually clear beds and get those replanted with all of the winter spinach and lettuces and onions, etc. And it's kind of sad to be finishing with those things, but we live seasonally and we just look forward to every season. And one of the things I really look forward to in October is everything just after we've done that replanting, everything quietens down for us. And we generally have reasonable weather in October and November, and sometimes in December. We certainly have this year. And so again, I'm out on my bike and hiking and doing all these things. And then on the rainy days, I really like those rainy days too, because I generally have quite a lot to do on rainy days. I'm working on my allotment database, I'm writing, I'm making a few YouTube videos, I'm doing a lot of reading. So, I'm just really looking forward to that. And that's the time as well when I've really liked this year that I can go swimming every morning. Our local pool has been open through most of COVID, not the lockdown period, but all the rest of it. And so 7:30 in the morning, I'm in that local pool and having a really good swim. And then actually, when I get out of the pool, there's a beautiful lounge by the side of the pool, and that's where I've been writing a book, but I'll tell you a little bit about that later. October is also when we clear all the squash beds and get all those replanted with field beans, and put in all of our late onions, overwintered onions and things like that. And then again, November, December, very quiet months, almost completely dominated by harvesting. I tend to only be on the allotment maybe 4 or 5 hours a week, something like that. There's really not a lot to do, just a little bit of tidying up, but I generally tidy up as I go. So one of the things I really like to do is I have a bucket for harvesting and a bucket for clearing with me, and so as I'm clearing beds, so harvesting beds, I'm also weeding the beds at the same time and just generally just doing a bit of clear up. And because I'm just doing that every Sunday, there's never a huge amount to do for me on the allotment in terms of sort of day-to-day maintenance. Now, I don't think I mentioned, but one of the really big things that's going to affect us in January is that we're giving up Jennie's plot. Now, we've really loved having Jennie's plot, but we've found over the years, and it's sort of come to a head this year, that we really just don't need it, because over the years we've just got so much better at gardening that we're growing so much more food and we're feeding so many more people that we're getting to the limit of our sort of interest in spending any more time on gardening. And Jennie told us in July, I think it was, that they're having another baby, and so they won't have anywhere near as much time to work on their plot. And Debbie and I help them a little bit, but our garden rule is, golden rule is, that we always reduce our allotment related workload year on year, and we've done that for the last 5 years. We started off at something like 20 hours a week or something like that, and that my time is now down to about 12 hours a week is what I'm estimating it to be next year, and that's just about right for me. That's 3 4-hour days, and I only ever do about 4 hours work at a time, so that's perfect for me. That means like half the time I'm out and about and half the time I'm on the allotment, and I really like that sort of split of activities in the summer months, spring and summer and early autumn months at least. So we're giving that plot up, and to illustrate why that makes sense, let's just talk a little bit about the finances for this year. So this year we've harvested about £12,000 worth of fruit and veg, and that's about £40 per square metre of growing area, and that's enough to provide most of the food for 28 people, and that's who we've been feeding this year. And we actually got permission from the council to allow us to feed some of our lockdown friends and neighbours during the lockdown periods, and actually we decided to extend that for the whole of the year, because normally our council won't allow us to gift food to friends and neighbours. The only people you can feed from the allotment are your family. Of course you can't sell it to anybody anyway, but you know, for gifting they restrict it to family. So we fed 28 people, and so that was a lot of work, but it was work that we really enjoyed doing because of the lockdown. So next year, hopefully without the lockdown, we're not going to spend quite as much time as we spent this year. So we're reducing that down to 14 people, and that's just our immediate family and the lady that we barter for our eggs with. And so 28 down to 14, so we're actually dropping maybe a third of our growing space in doing that, and that means we've got more space for those remaining 14 people, and so we're aiming to get those people closer to self-sufficiency in a similar way to us. And of course those are our immediate family, so they're the people we care about most and we want to put the most effort in for, to help them get the best food you can, well, not buy, but get access to by any means. So we're really looking forward to next year. A bit easier, a bit more variety. We're growing all sorts of new varieties next year, which is really exciting. And as I said, we're growing this richer, more varied diet for the rest of our family as well. So December, I decided that I'm going to write a book. Now I'm not going to publish the book because publishing a book is far too hard work for me. I'm not interested in that. But what I've noticed over the years of making YouTube videos is that YouTube is a great media and it's really quick and easy to produce content, but it's really hard in a way to create any kind of true narrative structure to the message that you're trying to impart. And it's really frustrating as well that you've got all this old content, some of which you might not agree with, so you've got no single source of truth about what you currently believe are the current best practices, etc., the best varieties to grow at what times of year and all of that. That is much better in text that you can keep up to date. So I'm writing this book, and the focus of the book is going to be on how to grow year round and be self-sufficient year round effortlessly, as effortlessly as possible. And there's a lot more to it than that. It's not just about how to grow carrots all year round or something like that. You know, what I've tried to do is talk about the kind of whole philosophy that we bring to gardening, all the tools and techniques, both technology tools and sort of working with your hands tools and techniques, as well as guides as to how to successfully get all the different classes of fruits and veggies available for as much of the year as possible, and what to substitute when you can't get it, and where to grow it, and how to cover it and protect it and water it and all of that sort of thing, again all year round. And also kind of how to think about the way that you eat from a seasonal eating perspective. So we're going through all the different types of meals, like a salad being an obvious example, or a stir fry, and then showing you how to get a great stir fry in December and a great stir fry in July, and they'll have very different ingredients, but then showing you how to grow all those ingredients. So that's the kind of book that I'm writing, and that's been my little hobby for December, and I'm working my way through it at a reasonable rate, and I'm kind of hoping that I'll be able to publish it chapter by chapter. It'll be available online, it'll be free to anybody. It will stitch together all of my YouTube content and all of the information in my databases, all different varieties and sewing guides and all of that sort of thing, all brought together into a single chapter. And so I'm hoping to publish those chapters at the rate at which people need them in next year's growing season. So for example, how to grow carrots all year round, how to grow spinach all year round, how to grow potatoes all year round, how to grow beetroot all year round. All of those will be available early in the year, in time for people to grow them all year round. So that's really been my gardening year. It's been rather wonderful, really, and it's in stark contrast to other elements of the year which have not been quite so great. But I really can't complain, because we live in a little small town, we live 5 minutes away from the beach, and we live within walking distance of the allotments, and so life has kind of proceeded reasonably normally for us, with just a few constraints and just a few sad bits and pieces. So I hope you've enjoyed your 2020 as much as me, and I hope you enjoy your 2021 as much as I'm hoping to. My name's Steve, this is the Seaside Allotment Channel. Have a great Christmas. I'll see you soon.